Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is the post-sprint race reaction for the Qatar GP. What was your thoughts on this sprint race? I'm not a big sprint race fan. I don't think the format actually adds a lot to the overall experience of F1 and the championship. I think the 1 hour practice session only actually adds a little bit to the GP race, as it causes some confusion on where people actually end up in the tire strategy. But the sprint race itself, I think, is kind of a if. It has some passes that helps, for the people that are there, and it makes them, a little bit more fast action on the track overall, the practice sessions that we see. But in this case, I did like the sprint race. It had a little bit of action because of the differences between the soft tires and the medium tires, and figure out which strategy was actually better. Plus, we had a little bit of off going on, the people spinning off into the gravel, causing safety cars, which then prolonged the stint of those soft tires. So it made you even wonder even more if they could actually pull those softs to the extent that they needed to make it that one stop on those soft tires. But what was your thoughts on the sprint race? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you think we should get rid of the sprint races? Should we make them sprint races for every weekend? Or should we keep it like it is with a few sprinkled in throughout the season to have sprint races? Anyway, I will go throughout the grid from the last to the first, just to give my thoughts on each driver and where they ended up and how I think they performed during this sprint race. So without further ado, we will start off with Liam Lawson. Liam Lawson kind of spun out by himself. Luckily, he's not causing any or collecting any other vehicles on the way, and got himself beached. He is a rookie, so I'll give him a little bit of leeway because he hasn't been in Formula One very long on these race weekends, and it is in a track that he is not used to seeing. And everybody was having and struggling with those, the back end of those cars stepping out, and with that dirty air, it would be easily done that he could, get loose and just spin out. Unfortunately, it beached him, so that he could not get back onto the track and get back into this race, causing our first safety car. So it is not the greatest for him, but as he's a rookie, it's not the horrible thing that it might have been for one of the more experienced drivers. Then we come to Logan Sargent, who basically did the same thing, just a little bit later. And I would have hit him a little bit harder because of his past. But with Liam Lawson doing so well in that AlphaTauri, I'm going to give Logan Sargent a little bit more slack because of the way those conditions were on this track. I think that was causing a little bit more headaches for these drivers, and with those rookie drivers, I think probably caught them a little bit more off guard and didn't exactly have the experience to deal with that as some of the other drivers did. Still doesn't look good for either of those drivers, so they'll probably be below average on any kind of ranking, but it's not like disastrous things, especially since they did not destroy or damage those vehicles when they spun off. They just got stuck in the gravel, so they could not get back onto the track. So not the greatest weekends for Liam and Sargent, but hopefully they can recover and gain some of that knowledge for the GP race tomorrow. Then we come to Sergio Perez, who, of no fault of his own, actually got caught up in a wreck and damaged that vehicle and spun it out into the gravel. This was caused by Nico Hülkenberg trying to attempt a pass on Ocon, with Ocon's soft tires dropping off, thinking that he could get around Ocon on the outside of a corner. Ocon was kind of pushing pressure on him. Perez had kind of come up on the outside of both of them and kind of squeezed them. So Hülkenberg had nowhere to go, and Ocon was squeezing him. So he was trying to drop back out of the mix, out of that sandwich, but his front end was still there when Ocon came over and collided with Haas, spinning him out into Perez, who was out there on the edge. So I'm sure Ocon didn't see Perez at all, so he would have thought that Hulkenberg could have moved over farther in that corner and just kind of squeezed him out to defend that position. So I don't think it's anybody's fault of the three drivers. I think it's just a racing incident. Unfortunately for Perez, he got knocked out, which automatically gave his teammate the win for the championship. So he didn't drag that out any more than he could have. It was kind of Perez's fault to start off with, in the sense that with that Red Bull power and ability, he shouldn't have been at the back of the field in the middle of that field stack. He should have been closer to the front, competing in that area instead of that mid-pack. So in that regard, it's Sergio's fault, but for the actual wreck itself, it was not his fault. And so even though he has caused some incidences in the last few races and struggled, this one was less his fault in the sense of the actual incident itself, and was probably able to get around both of those fairly easily if he could have avoided that collision. So Sergio, not the greatest job for not qualifying where he should have been qualifying, but in the actual sprint race itself, he was doing fairly decent coming back through the field from that, 8th position, and just didn't quite make it where he needed to be, and got unlucky in collision with Ocon. Ocon, again, was doing a fairly good job, qualifying in 10th. So he's in that mid-pack. Just with those soft tires, he was kind of jumping up ahead of several people on those starts of all the couple of safety cars we had in front of them. And then they would drop back once they got going on those medium tires, kind of fell into their windows. So he was trying to maintain those positions that he gained on those starts, and just happened to catch where he couldn't really do anything about it with the vision out of those vehicles. So I don't blame Ocon at all, and it's a shame that due to this, it was an incident, he kind of got knocked out and couldn't put any other pressure, on that point ranking spots that he potentially could have made it into. The same thing with Nico Hulkenberg. He did a fabulous job of getting to that 7th position on qualifying, even though he got that one spot with Alonso's lap being deleted. So he kind of got moved up with all those laps times. He did a really good job of maintaining in the boundaries, getting into those spots where he could actually fight for points. And it was looking fairly decently because Nico was on those medium tires. They were coming back into that window, so that he was going to probably move up potentially into more of those point positions, and just got squeezed and when he had nowhere to go, and it caused that collision, making him retire that car. Even though he didn't get into the gravel, he basically made it around to the pits and pulled in and stopped that Haas. So I think Nico actually did a really good job, even though it doesn't look like it because he DNF'd. Then we come to the sprint race finishers, and that's Guan Yu Zhou in that 15th position. I think he is struggling in that Alfa Romeo compared to his teammate as of late. He's not quite getting to where Valtteri is in the qualifying or races that we've seen. I think he could use some improvement on that, so I'm going to have him a little bit below average on that, because I think he should be able to get closer to his teammate. But we didn't see a lot of him in the back of the field due to all of the tire differences that were making the front runner positions switch out. So I didn't get to see a lot of him, so he may have had a better race than I am showing or telling you here. Kevin Magnussen had a horrible qualifying session for both the GP race and for this sprint race, getting in that 19th position for this sprint, working his way up to 14th. He had a decent start, gaining like 4 spots at the very beginning of the race, on those soft tires, and of course, then those soft tires died. So he just started falling back through the field and just made it ahead of the Guan Yu Zhou at the end. So not a great race for Kevin. He still needs to get kind of his grips on this Qatar circuit, as he hasn't really got familiar enough to get what he needs out of that Haas compared to his teammate, Nico Hülkenberg. So he's probably needs a little bit of work done. Hopefully he can, get that experience from this sprint race so that he can apply that in the GP race tomorrow and work his way back through that field. Lance Stroll qualified 16th and ended up in 13th. Even though he was kind of out of spec compared to his teammate, he did gain a few positions. He gained 2 off the start. He was on those soft tires, like a lot of the field. So he gained some spots at the very beginning and was trying to defend those after they were warming up. Those medium tires were warming up into that window for them. And they were just so much faster than the softs at that point that he could not really maintain those positions. So it's more on him that he couldn't qualify, get the most out of that during the qualifying session than it was during the sprint race itself. I still think has potential, as we've seen earlier in the seasons, but he probably should be replaced, even though they will not replace Stroll because of his dad owning that team. So we'll have to see where he lands in his head on this to see if he can actually start, getting the grips again to get the most out of it and be closer to his teammate in these GP races. Yuki qualified 18th and ended up in 12th. Pretty good run, even though he had lost a position at the very start of the race and then worked his way back through this. He was on the medium tires. So, again, he probably dropped back into the field and then was able to work his way back through after those mediums came into that warm window for those mediums where the softs were dropping off, getting back up into the field just outside of points into that 12th position. So a decent job for him. Not quite where the AlphaTauris want to be, and as they want to get into those point areas, but having a decent fight with Valtteri in that 11th position. Which brings us to Valtteri, who was qualified in 13th and ended up in 11th. He did a decent job, but not the greatest job for that Alfa Romeo. I didn't see a lot of him, so if anybody has any updates on Valtteri and how well he was performing, you could put those in the comments. But I think he did a decent job, just not where that Alfa Romeo really wants to be, even though it probably doesn't have the oomph that it really needs, the development that it needs. So hopefully when they transition, they'll get a little bit more aerodynamics into that Alfa Romeo, and they will be able to be a little bit more competitive in the field. This leads us to the top 10, where we have Pierre Gasly, who had a really good battle with a lot of the drivers around him. He qualified in 11th and ended up in 10th. I have that he passed Hamilton on lap 15 for 8th during the restart, and one of the restarts, and then Hamilton was able to get him back because of the tires and whatnot. But he was really putting up a fight on those soft tires. Not the best strategy for the Alpines, but again, it's hard to judge those at the beginning of the race with the little tire experience that they've had on this track. And I think he did a good job on those soft tires, getting all that he could out of that Alpine in those soft tires, just not quite into that point range of that 8th position or higher for the sprint. So hopefully he can learn and pull what he's seen in the sprint and make something out of it in the GP race tomorrow. Fernando Alonso was in that 9th position, ended up at 9th. It sounded like Albon was able to get him due to the tires, and that soft tire on the Aston Martin wasn't really performing as well as some of the other ones. he got a little bit closer to the front, but then could not really maintain that, even with his experience of defending. And Albon was able to get the draft and pass him, and was actually keeping him in that 9th position. And talking of Alex Albon, qualifying in 17th, worked his way up to 8th. He did say that there was less wind at the sprint race, and so that Williams came more alive during this race, and so is able to do a lot more with it. So we'll have to see if that's the case tomorrow or not. He said he was like right at the edge, which I didn't see, but very close to actually pipping that 7th position from Charles Leclerc at the very end of the sprint. So a really good job for him coming back so far back in the field and actually putting pressure and actually getting points in that Williams. So a really good job for Albon in this race. It comes to Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc gained a couple of positions at the very beginning of the race. He was able to pass and during the restart for that 5th position, and then drop back into the field because those Ferraris were on that softs and they were just eating those tires up like the Ferraris do. They don't have the best life on those tires for that Ferrari, and so they were dropping back in the field, letting the Mercedes get past, and Norris, after he dropped back at the beginning of the race, get past in those positions. So I think he did a good job for being a Ferrari that was, really hard on their tires and using those soft tires, which we already saw that most people were dropping off fairly rapidly. So I think he did a good job, just not where the Ferrari needs to be in this in few races to keep those positions for the constructors. They would like to be more competitive with that Mercedes. And the same thing with Carlos Sainz. I know at one point Leclerc was thinking that Carlos was struggling, and he probably was at some point. And hopefully he was thinking that possibly get orders to get past him, but they didn't, which probably helped somewhat to try to defend from behind and not lose both of the 7th position as well. But I know Leclerc wasn't quite where he wanted to be, and Sainz wasn't where he wanted to be, but they did a fairly decent job in this race. They both gained a couple of positions at the beginning of the race, and we're just struggling on those soft tires to maintain those positions that they gained. Lewis Hamilton actually did a really good job, I think, coming in from 12th to 5th. He was on those medium tires, so he had to struggle at the start of the races and then to maintain anything, and then was able to come back and pass several people. I have him passing Gasly on lap 10 for 11th, and then again on Gasly on lap 17th for 8th, and then Alonso on lap 18 for 7th. And then he worked his way up to 5th in all of this, ahead of those Ferraris. So I think he was able to get the most out of that Mercedes in the stint that he was in. I know he's coming back from the mid-pack, so passing was a little bit more difficult, especially on those 3 restarts. So yeah, there's a total of 4 starts on this race for those soft tires to really take advantage of those soft tires, and yet the medium tires won in the end over all those soft tires in the dropping off way too quick for those soft tires to be a really valid strategy. George actually kind of came out strong. He took over that 2nd position at the very start of the race and was able to take first spot from Oscar on lap 3 and had a good restart, but then Oscar was able to just get the oomph out of that McLaren to pass Russell on those soft tires. And then he wanted to really pit and switch off those tires, but his team basically said, no, you would lose too many, which I kind of agree with in that position because of the safety cars. I think he would have dropped back farther than he could have made up. So it probably would have dropped him out of the points. Since it was a sprint race, if it was a full GP race, I would definitely think that the pit stop is probably worth it, because there's probably enough laps left for him to make up that ground. But he did a risk and ended up in the same position that he started off in, which is actually not too bad considering how bad those soft tires dropped off, and how quickly they dropped off, which was kind of surprising to me on that regard. And since the teams were actually, jumping towards those softs, thinking that they would last the full sprint race without having too much trouble, I think. Lando had a horrible start, lost 4 positions on that dirty side of the track, but was then able to make up most of those back into ended up in that 3rd position behind Max Verstappen, just working his way through on those medium tires as George's softs dropped off and as the Ferrari softs dropped off. So he was able to work his way back up through the field. I think he did a decent job. He had that, as I said, he had that bad start, probably most likely because it was on the dirty side of the track and had a lot of dust that I saw on that start of the track. So he really couldn't defend easily, and it was just hard to get the power down on the track. So I don't blame Lando a lot, and he was able to keep his head, which is always a good plus, from dropping back into the field and not getting too frustrated and causing more mistakes. So I give that to Lando, where he was able to pull back into that 3rd position. I do feel sorry for Lando in the sense that he has been on that McLaren and doing such a good job over the years, and then having to play second fiddle to other people winning in that McLaren over the times. So we had Daniel doing that 1 win, and then Oscar winning for the first time here, and yet Lando has not had his win. I know it's coming, but I'm sure that's frustrating on his point, even though it's good for the team on the side of the McLaren coming in wins and getting the points, as many points as they can. But I feel sorry for Lando in that winning regard. And this one is probably a little bit his fault, because he's probably made a few little mistakes that compounded on the start of the race. But it wasn't overall bad in the sense of losing too many spots. I think he was able to gain those spots because of that dirty spot that he started in. That wasn't his fault, and it wasn't really the most out of that at the start of that race. So I think he did a decent job, just not where he wanted to be. Max did a fairly good job, and where he started off in 3rd and ended up in 2nd. He did kind of drop back behind George because George had those soft tires and Max was on those medium tires. I kind of dropped back behind him for a brief moment, but then was able to move back up through the field, taking out Charles Leclerc for that 4th position on lap 9, and then getting past Sainz for lap 10 for 3rd, and then George passed him for that 2nd position on I think it's like lap 16 or 17. So he had a slight mistake on the start, in the sense that he dropped back because of those medium tires. Wasn't able quite to, not really a mistake, but just the issue of those medium tires versus the soft tires on those starts. Couldn't maintain that position, but kept his head, made it back to 2nd. I know at one point he was trying to get to that 1st position and trying to do the strategy, and his team basically came over and said, don't overcook those tires. We need those tires. They'll come back to you. So he did that and easily maintained that 2nd position. And then, of course, now he's 3-time world champion. So, and he had the fastest lap of the sprint. So an excellent job for Max. Can't complain for anything that he's did during this race. And then, of course, we have Oscar Piastri, who was qualified in 1st and ended in 1st and did a phenomenal job. He was kind of worried when those soft tire people were coming by, and it ended up like George passing him for that first position, thinking that he had lost it and they had the wrong strategy. But he was able to keep calm and let those mediums come back to him, and then to retake that position and easily keep that position over Max. So this is the first time we've actually seen a non-Red Bull win on merit, as we've seen last time we had Max back in the field because of engine issues and some other things. So I think this is a really good showing for Oscar Piastri, and I'm really happy for him to win. It's really kind of hard to believe that he's still a rookie and he's kind of won a sprint race. We'll have to see where he ends up tomorrow in the GP race. I know he had that lap deletion, which pushed him back farther into the field for tomorrow's GP. We'll have to see if they have the right strategy and if they can actually be competitive. Probably not. Probably the Red Bull will probably have the overall strategy and to maintain that lead, where the McLarens will have to fight through some of the grid to get to that point to put pressure on him. But it would be hopeful to see and be nice to see some more battles near the front of this race. So overall, an excellent job for Oscar, and I can't see where he's going to end up overall, with seasons to come. I can definitely see him, competing for world championships. So that leads us to our constructors standing, where I said earlier, Max Verstappen is now the 2023 Drivers' Champion, and this is his third in a row. So he has won 3 world champions, which puts him in kind of a ranking with several others. Great names alongside that you've heard during the race. Basically, the rest of the field stayed the same. We had a little bit of pushing and pulling here and there. We have like Lando Norris has 1 point now ahead of George Russell instead of being tied. A little bit of gaps opening up and a little bit of gaps closing, but the same overall layout for the championship, with Max winning with the 407 points. And we have several races to go, so we'll see how far Max can make it. That gap between him and his teammate, which is in second place. Same kind of goes with the constructor standings. We have Red Bull Racing winning the last race that was in Japan, and now has 630 points over Mercedes 314 points. So the battle is between the Ferraris and the Mercedes, and then between McLaren and the Aston Martins, and then back in the field to see if Alfa Romeo can overtake Haas, or Haas can get close to Williams in that regard. Williams made a point, so that gap's increased. So I don't think there's a lot of chance for that, but they still need to stay ahead of the Alfa Romeos. So that is the big umph there, and with that, taking out points, it makes it hard. So, with the constructors and drivers staying the same, there's not a lot to really talk about there. And of course, our next race is the actual GP race that is tomorrow, and this will be at noon Central Time of the U.S. And so hopefully I will see you back here on this channel for my post-race reaction for that full GP race tomorrow afternoon. Until then, I will see you on the grid. Farewell.